Put back on the stream here. Okay. Get the music back on. Check, check. Okay. We'll start the show in about 1 minute. Can you guys hear me okay in the chat? Thank you, Bradley. Thank you, Bradley.
Want to see you be an SEO expert. Paul Andre DeVera, steady dropping knowledge. Over 15 years in the game, so he knows all about it. Master the art of SEO, you will be amazed. Time to get your brand off page to on page. Dropping knowledge, legendary for sure. Whether you're just getting started or self-employed entrepreneur. Yeah, let's go. Subscribe to the SEO video show.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to episode 13. That's number 13. My name is Paul Andre DeVera, the host of the SEO video show. A lot of people know me as Dre. I go pretty fast in the very beginning. I go over some news, hopefully a pretty entertaining type way. I go over the latest news, tips, and my favorite part of the show is when I get to introduce my guest. And my guest this week is the world-renowned SEO award-winning speaker, Barry Adams. So let's go ahead and say hey, what's up to everyone in chat. I see Elizabeth, Delilah, Shar, Ray, Bradley, and everyone out there watching the replay. Welcome to the show. I want to say what's up to everyone at the SIA group, IMG group, and of course the super secret SEO Skype chat. If you don't know about it, you should. There's a lot of good stuff coming out of that chat. You can go to topicalrelevance.com and sign up over there. Okay, now that if I made you smile, laugh, or anything, if you found this show helpful, please don't forget to like and subscribe and share this video to your friends. And now let's get on with the show.
This is Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man. Why do SEOs love the farmer's market? Lots of organic content.
Okay, first with Google, some Google news. As you know, the past couple of weeks, there's been some indexing issues, especially within news stories. We found that the news content with the past couple of weeks has been acting up. And also just yesterday, two separate indexing issues were happening. Like we had something going on with the mobile indexing and with some things with canonicalization. Let's go ahead and make sure we go to my next piece of news, which is by Grow with Google. They actually put out a video actually last week, and it's about putting appointment links to your Gmbs. I actually was playing with this a little bit, and I was able to add a bunch of appointment links in this Gmb feature. Let's go ahead and take a look, and I'll show you what I'm talking about.
There are two ways to add bookings to your business profile on Google. The first way is to add an appointment link that connects your existing online scheduling tool with your business profile. The second way is to use a scheduling service that integrates with Google that creates a booking button on your business profile. Both approaches require that the business profile be verified. Different categories of businesses are eligible for each option.
Okay, guys, you can add more than one appointment link. I was able to add a bunch of links in there. Go ahead and play with it. I'm not saying go crazy with it, but hey, that's something to play with. And speaking of links, last week, AHREFs actually put out their free tool. I didn't mention last week because we had so much news to go over, but let's take a look and see what they're talking about over at AHREFs.
Today I'm introducing a brand new tool called AHREFS Webmaster Tools, or AWT. It's a completely free SEO tool that allows you to get deep and actionable insights on any website you own. So you might be wondering, why are we all of a sudden opening free access to some of AHREFs' tools, while tens of thousands of SEOs are happily paying to access this data? Well, not all websites are intended to make money, but that doesn't mean they don't have great content that deserves to be found. And that's what we want to help you do, by giving you solid data, tools, and learning materials to keep your site in good health.
There you go. Free tool. Take advantage of it. It's pretty cool. And next, we had a test that was going on with about shared hosting. It was a test that was actually tweeted out. Like the guys over at Authority Hackers actually put something out where it was like testing shared hosting and dedicated hosting. Let's go in here and take a listen.
I'm going to talk about shared hosting, and there was a study from a company called Reboot Online that essentially picked an imaginary query and built 10 sites. 5 of them were on Amazon Web Servers on their own IP without anyone on there, and 5 of these other sites that were targeting this query were on, shitty shared hosting with bad neighborhood, basically, like hacking and porn sites, etc., sharing the same IP. And what they found all the time, and there's a big, we're going to put the link in the description, you can go and read it. I'm not going to do the whole thing, but essentially the end conclusion was that sites that are on bad neighborhoods, for pretty much all of them except one, and below those sites that were on their own IP are on Amazon Web Server. And there's a graph for that, there's been a lot of debates on Twitter, etc. And it's quite interesting because it's something that's been talked about for a long time in SEO, but never really proven, tested, etc.
Okay, guys, let me just double check really quick. Can you guys hear me okay in the chat? Are you guys going and seeing? Oh, you hear an echo. You hear an echo there? Let me go ahead and try and fix this right here real quick. Hear me? Check. Check. No sound now. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next one. Just real quick over that piece of news. If you are doing something in looking at some hosting, you want to make sure you have some, if you're within bad neighborhoods, or if you can go dedicated, hey, maybe it's worth about just going dedicated on a dedicated host. Let me go ahead and go on to the next piece of news here and you guys let me know if you can hear anything. But the next piece of news here is by a post by Bill Slawski. He tends to write things that are a little overwhelming. It can be overwhelming for some people. And Clint Butler over at the SEO this week actually talks about and breaks it down a little more when he about this new patent that he writes about. Let's check it out.
SEO by the C. This is a featured snippet answer scores ranking. So basically what this patent is doing, there's scores, right? So you have this query dependent score. How related is it to the actual query? Okay. And then you have, and that's coming in kind of there's 2 little algorithms inside of this patent that actually run this query. It's dependent and independent, and those combine and then to say this is your score. And then it rolls down and you have a candidate answer and an answer score that goes along with it. And then this answer score is what triggers your page showing up or not over someone else's. So under the guise of this patent, assuming they implement it, we'll take these 2 scores and they'll grade it. This one will be how many words are inside of your answer that are related to semantically related to the keyword that was searched, and then actually it's the other way around, directly related to the keyword to search, and this one is semantic related to the keyword to search. And if you hit both of these really high, you get a higher score, and then it bounces that passage off of everyone else's to create your answer score, and then your answer score is then turned into where you rank, or if you rank or not for a featured snippet. It's kind of cool.
Okay, a little bit more in layman's terms. Clint explains that for us. I want to go ahead and go really quickly to the next piece of news so we can get on to with my guest. But as you guys know, that I am an enterprise SEO, and Kevin Indig is also an enterprise SEO, and he actually shares a lot of great information when it comes to being an in-house enterprise SEO. Let me go ahead and share what he had said in the Business of Digital podcast.
Take a storytelling course and look at the data that you have available and spend time on telling stories with that data. And that data can be traffic data, can be conversion data, revenue data, whatever, but get better at getting people excited about SEO. You know, if you go to an SEO and you tell them, oh man, our technical SEO audit was terrible and we have all these 302s and my gosh, and he's going to say, yeah, that's awesome. I'll talk to you in a month or something, you know. But if you're able to talk in a gripping story with that people can relate to, that's the gangster move in my mind.
Gangster move, guys. Make sure you are a great storyteller. I mean, I can totally attest to this because, I mean, I have to tell a lot of stories, especially when it's pretty technical. You have to really, really break it down. Now to my last two pieces of news, which kind of relates to my guest this week. The next piece is an AMP and WordPress integration. The AMP channel actually put out a new video series on their channel on integrating AMP and WordPress. Let's listen in.
In this series, we are going to learn how to take advantage of AMP capabilities to build user-first WordPress sites. We will focus on WordPress for two reasons. Number one, WordPress accounts today for about 35% of the web. Therefore, enabling AMP in that platform has the potential of having a great impact on the health and vibrancy of the open web as a whole. And second, we can use WordPress as a mechanism to showcase AMP content generation in content management systems and therefore shed light on the path to do the same on other platforms.
My guest this week actually has his own view on AMP, and we'll talk about it very, very soon. And my last piece of news is by Google. They're actually pledging about $1 billion in licensing licensing news and payments for news publishers. And my guest today is a news SEO optimizer, and we can talk about a little more about it with him and see what he thinks about it. But let's listen in real quick by my buddy Justin.
Google is actually launching a news aggregation and curation product called Google News Showcase, and has already signed deals with 200 publications to provide content for this new product. The program is going to be launching in Germany and Brazil initially, and Google is in talks with publishers in other countries, including the US, for future release. So how's this going to work? Google News Showcase will integrate into Google News app and Google Search. It's going to tease images and summaries linking back to stories in the outlets, and video and audio content is planned to come later. Publishers will be paid partly on the number of stories they curate and summarize for Google News, but readership numbers won't actually affect how much publishers will get, which is kind of interesting to me because YouTubers get paid on the actual viewership, so I don't know why news publishers wouldn't get paid on readership. So Google hasn't really said how much publishers will get, but they've committed $1 billion to licensing fees over the next 3 years.
Okay, now does that change the way we do news SEO? We'll ask my guest today, and let's go ahead and introduce my guest. Here.
Barry is the founder of Poemic Digital, an award-winning SEO consulting specializing in technical SEO for news publishers and e-commerce websites across the globe. He's been building and ranking websites since 1998 and has worked a wide range of clients from micro-businesses to world's largest media companies. He's given hundreds of talks at conferences around the world, including Brighton SEO, Friends of Search, Digital Summit, Search Leads, Check My SEO, Growth Marketing Live, Digital Elite, SMX, Digital Zone, Large and Learn Inbound, Ungag, Pub On, and many, many more. In 2014, he was a Danny Award winner of Digital Industries Person of the Year. In 2016, he won UK Search Award for Best Small ACO Agency. In 2018, he won Danny Award for Best SEO Campaign. And just last year, he won the Best SEO at the Global Business Insights Award. Please welcome Barry, the trainer, the speaker, the consultant, Adams. Barry,
how's it going, my buddy?
That is the coolest intro I have ever had in my entire life. That's amazing, Dre. That's amazing.
Cool. Okay, let's see here. I want to go ahead and I want to ask about that one slide that I actually inserted into the presentation I did. It said, like, this guy is a. Why would someone call you a?
I have strongly worded opinions. You may have noticed that when you see some of my talks and my videos. And I was on an audit call with a client talking through the recommendations I was making. And the client was sharing a screen with me, and the lead developer was also in on the call. The client shared a screen with me, and the lead developer had said in the local Slack channel that the client had opened, but the developer didn't realize I could also see that particular sentence about me, because we had a bit of a disagreement about a particular development issue. So that was, yeah, one of my claims to fame is I can rub developers the wrong way sometimes.
Got it. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, I want to kind of like take it back a little bit. You know, I gave you an intro. We know, like, you know, you're the founder of Potomac Digital. Can we take it back a little bit and see, like, how did you actually even get started with SEO? Like, what about SEO made you like get into it?
God, it's way back when. I mean, I was hacking together my own websites back in 1998 with just pure HTML and using Front Page 2000 back in those days, which was actually quite a good HTML editor back in the day. And realized that once you build a website, nobody actually visits it unless you find a way to get it to rank in search engines. And then Google was just barely on the radar at that stage. You know, we're still optimizing for the Yahoo directory and for Alta Vista and search engines like that. So I sort of started dabbling in it a little bit without even realizing it was called SEO. And it wasn't anything I ever imagined I would make a career out of. I just thought, oh, this is something as a bit of a side project to try and get traffic to my own websites. And I didn't really start taking it seriously until 2004 when I got a job as an international webmaster at a company, which is still the coolest job title I've ever had, by the way, international webmaster. And then it became part of my remit, and I realized this is actually really interesting stuff. For me, this is like a perfect blend of marketing and technology, because I was primarily working in IT functions up to then. And sometimes when you work in IT, you feel very disconnected from the real world. It's just computers. And for me, I missed that connection with real people actually using the technology, because I was doing network administrative stuff and that sort of stuff, and managing intranets to a certain extent as well. So for me, SEO is that sweet spot where it's very technical, at least the part that I focus on, but there's a very direct impact on people going to websites, people using websites, and then people engaging with the companies behind those websites. So for me, that was sort of a sweet spot. And I think I really caught the bug in 2007 when my employer at the time sent me to the Search Engine Strategies Conference in New York. And I went there thinking, oh, I might pick up a thing or two because I thought I knew SEO. And there was a 3-day conference, and I walked out of there like Jon Snow. I knew nothing about SEO. I was so overwhelmed with the sheer scope and the breadth of it all, and all the different things that were happening in the industry, that I really had my eyes open in that conference. And I realized this is my career. This is what I want to do. That's when I really caught the bug.
So, I mean, what would you say would you learn from just the conferences, or do you have like a mentor, or were you going to websites? Like, how did you learn kind of like the basics of like SEO?
I mean, a lot of it is just trial and error, especially in the early days. I was really lucky that I joined an online community called the SEO Training Dojo with David Harry and Terry Van Horn and a whole load of other people who I'm still in contact with today. And they were very generous with sharing their knowledge and their expertise as well. So I suppose you could call them my mentors, especially in those early days. And, like everybody else, you read the blog posts, so you go to Whiteboard Friday videos and all of that. And it's very hands-on. I mean, nowadays you have a lot more options in terms of doing trainings and then getting other people to help you. But back in the mid 2000s, it was very much diving in the deep end, and you either swim or you drown, really.
Yeah. So you said you had the best. What's the international SEO was your best title? I win the
International Webmaster.
International Webmaster. So I win do I win the best intro for you?
Oh yeah, you definitely win best intro. I mean, that's the best way I've ever been announced, even on the big stages when they get intro music and everything. It wasn't that impressive. This is a different level. I might have to take that video snapshot and start playing that all the time now.
You got it, Barry. Barry, you deserve it. You're the man. I want to take a look at something real quick. You actually even mentioned something about AMP on when I was doing the news, and I actually had this tweet that you did that this is it, I'm done, I achieved everything I could do. Because if you search what is Google AMP, your blog post comes up and says Google AMP can go to hell. That's hilarious. I mean, tell me a little more about why Google AMP can go to hell.
Yeah, I'm not its biggest cheerleader. You may have seen that. I think, for a long time, Google was very much focused on adapting itself to the web. Because the web is messy and chaotic and websites do all kinds of different things. And Google put a lot of effort into trying to index all the content regardless of how it was presented on the web, and then modifying its own infrastructure to come to grips with how web pages are built and published in all the kinds of different forms. And with AMP, it was one of the first times they changed that dynamic the other way around, where they thought, you know what, all these webmasters listen to every word that we say, trying to, unravel the Google algorithms. Why don't we start using that to our advantage and trying to get webmasters to build things in certain ways so that it's easier for us as Google to understand what websites are doing? And AMP is probably the biggest step they've ever taken in that. I mean, things like XML sitemaps also play a part in that. Schema.org structured data is a very strong example of that as well. But AMP is really, for me, an attack on the freedom of the open web, because it is Google's way of saying, forget all the other ways you've used to building web pages, all those chaotic and messy things. No, here is a very tight framework, a very clear framework, and you build it in that way. And Google's ambition initially for AMP definitely was to make it a new global standard of building web pages. I think they sort of went away from that because the adoption rate just hasn't been high enough, and people just haven't been enthusiastic enough, and they've gotten a lot of pushback from people like me and a lot of people in the development community as well, who just don't agree with what AMP is trying to do. So they're sort of letting it go to a certain extent, or sort of making it more of an open W3C standard, but even that is sort of dressing it up a little bit, because it's still Google engineers who make all the decisions. Even though it's open source, it's still Google who makes the decisions about what AMP is doing, what direction it's going into, what new modules are being added to that. And I don't think that's the right way. I think the web, it should be free and chaotic and open and low barriers to entry. And it is Google who should stay adapting to the web, and the web should not adapt itself to what Google wants. We don't want to be captured in this straitjacket of Google's perception of what the web should be. It should be the other way around. It's Google who should be working harder to try and understand the web, and just let people build whatever they want on the web.
Hear that, Google? Let us build what we want on the web. We want to make sure we make it free and open source, really open source for everyone. Okay, so I want to talk about Google AMP, because last week on Google Mythbusters, they were talking about like how, and this is something that you really specialize in, news SEO. And they said that if you want to get into the news carousel, you had to have an AMP, or you have to use the AMP framework. Is this true, or how are you actually doing it? How are you doing news SEO if you hate AMP, and then this is what your main focus is on?
Yeah, at the moment, if you want to appear in the top stories carousel on mobile search results, you need AMP versions of your articles. It's almost exclusively AMP articles that show up in mobile carousel. Now, Google has started letting that particular requirement go in the course of 2021, when they also implement core web vitals and things like that. So they will let any fast-loading mobile optimized version of articles rank well in top stories. But that's so far just Google saying that, and we have to sort of wait and see how that's really going to impact on news publishers. So, despite my loathing for AMP, I do have to recommend with my newest clients that they implement it to get mobile visibility, because without AMP at the moment, you don't get any traction in mobile search. Plus, having AMP versions of your articles helps tremendously in Google Discover, which is also a very strong source of traffic for a lot of news publishers. So while I loathe AMP, I sort of have to work with it and have to recommend my clients to adopt it for their articles.
So you guys listening there, I mean, even though it may not be the best thing, AMP, if you want to get your news SEO down, use AMP. Okay, with AMP, and you mentioned Discover. Like, what's the relationship between news and Discover? Is there you think there's gonna be more of like integration between the two? And also to tie it into like my last piece of news, like, are you affected, or like how can we how can people get paid? Is your clients getting paid, or is Google paying your clients with the publishers that you're working with?
Yeah, first on Google Discover, this is an interesting beast. It's a bit different from regular Google News, although there's many strong overlaps. Although, you see all kinds of content show up in Discover, because it's very much based on personal interests and engagement metrics. So it's not just news publishers, although it's primarily news publishers who tend to show up in Google Discover. But some of my own blog posts have gotten traffic from Google Discover, to my surprise, because I'm not a news publisher. So I think anybody who publishes content can get traffic from Discover, as long as you mark it up with things like article structured data and have a nice big featured image of 1200 pixels wide and things like that. So Google can show it in that feed in a nice aesthetically pleasing way. In terms of getting paid by Google, I'll be entirely honest with you, Dre. When I saw that news today, I thought, well, that's a very convenient little PR exercise, because Google has been fighting a battle, especially in Australia recently, where they're being forced to recompensate publishers for the news that they're pulling into Google News and top stories. And similar scenarios have played out in France and Spain, and the EU in general is looking at it at the moment as well. So for me, this feels a bit like a PR exercise where Google is saying, we are going to actually compensate publishers for the news that we're using, trying to maybe undermine the legal cases that are being used against them at the moment for Google's being accused of basically stealing publishers' content and just profiting off it with ads, which has some merit. I don't think it's an entirely accurate picture, because Google does send a lot of traffic to news publishers. But a lot of people just read headlines and never actually click through to the actual articles. So I can sort of see where publishers come from, but I can also see where Google is coming from. So it's a very interesting dynamic in that regard. But there's 1 billion fund. None of my publishing clients are getting a penny from Google, except maybe through some AdSense advertising. So.
Got it. Okay. So, you also do mention that, you're also a technical SEO, right? I mean, you have this pet peeve about people saying indexations versus indexing. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, I blame Pierre Farr for that. Pierre Farr is a former Googler. He used to work on the Google Analytics team. And he was at one of my conference calls, one of my earliest conference talks, where I used indexation. And he came up to me afterwards and said, Barry, that's the wrong word to use. So I Googled it, and he was right. Indexation is a financial term about adjusting interest rates. It has nothing to do with indexing, which is what search engines do. And if you go through Google research papers and Google patents, they don't use indexation at all. They use indexing, and even in their own documentation, they say indexing. John Mueller, everybody at Google says indexing or index coverage and that sort of stuff. The only search engine who actually does use indexation is people at Bing, which is maybe why it's an inferior search engine, because it's the wrong terminology. So I sort of started gently poking people for using the indexation word. I've stopped using it myself, obviously. And it sort of got out of hand. It's a bit of a running gag that has sort of got a bit out of hand now. It's been one of the hills I've chosen to die on, and it's probably the least important hill I could have chosen in the context of SEO. But hey, for me, it's just a bit of fun and games, really.
Okay, speaking of indexing, you also talk about like sitemap optimizations. I know you have a whole big blog posted on your blog on sitemaps. What's one of the main things that we should all be paying attention to with sitemaps? Is it okay to use that it's things that are automatically generated from like plugins, or do you actually go in and customize your sitemaps?
Yeah, I mean, not everybody has that luxury, of course, to customize sitemaps and do it all manually the hard way. And if you have a WordPress website and you install a plugin like Yoast SEO or whatever, Rank Math, and that sort of does the work for you. With really large websites, and this as an enterprise SEO, you sort of have to sometimes do things a bit differently, and you can run into certain reporting limits in Google Search Console quite quickly. Too large sitemaps don't get processed very easily. Google has a 50,000 URL limit on sitemaps, but in my experience, that's too much if you cram it full of 50,000. If you trim it all the way back, and some websites only put 1,000 URLs per sitemap, which does lead to really good levels of indexing, but you run into certain reporting limits with Google Search Console. It will only show you up to like 400, I think it's 400 XML sitemaps, which I have some publishers who publish 1,000 articles a day. So within a year and a bit, they've run out of that limit, and they stop getting that visibility in Google Search Console. So for me, it's more like finding a bit of a balance there. For really large websites, I recommend up to 10,000 URLs per sitemap. Separate them out by type of content as well, because it makes it easier to use Google Search Console to find where the gaps in indexing are and where you may need to optimize things. It makes it a bit easier to troubleshoot issues, because on large websites, especially, getting content crawled and indexed can be a bit of a challenge. So it's about using Google's own limitations to your advantage, but not pushing that to breaking point. Because, like I said, the 50,000 URLs per sitemap is probably too much, and Google just doesn't tend to process those sitemaps completely.
Separate your sitemaps, guys. So break it up. That's some great tips over there you got going on. Okay, let's see here. With the sitemaps, I want to go down to like the way you kind of attack like your SEO. It's called technical relevancy and authority. It's an acronym. Actually, if you spell it backwards, it spells art. Did you notice that? It's you go authority, relevance.
No.
Yeah, if you spell it backwards. Yeah. So if you
the art of SEO. There we go.
There we go. You got the three pillars. It's authority, relevancy, and technical. And that's how you approach SEO. Can you like explain this art of SEO that you just found out about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the only one. I'm not the first one even to have modeled it that way. I mean, I after I've written my first blog post about my 3 pillars of SEO model, and I started to Google it, I realized other people had written very similar things to that before. So it's something that I think a lot of SEOs have independently arrived at. For me, the first pillar, technical SEO, is actually primarily about crawling, interacting with Googlebot as the crawling mechanism, the discovery mechanism, and optimizing your website for that. The second part, relevancy, is about the indexing system. Once Googlebot has crawled it indexes the content, and the relevancy part is about optimizing for indexing. There's a lot of classic on-page SEO goes in there. Structured data is actually part of indexing as well, though it does sort of fall under the header of technical SEO. I put mobile there as well, JavaScript, all those sorts of things. And then the last bit, authority, that's about ranking. That's about ranking in Google's front end, the actual query engine, where Google presents the search results, and that's sending the right authority and trust signals. Links come into play, EAT signals come into play, and I find that that's a very useful model, especially when it comes to teaching SEO, because I do a lot of teaching now in terms of corporate trainings, general open to the public technical SEO trainings. I do lectures at local universities as well on SEO, and I find that this is a very easy to grasp model, which gives the students a very basic but thorough understanding of what SEO is and how these different elements all work together to optimize websites for specific aspects of Google and other search engines in general.
There you have it, The Art of SEO by Barry Adams. Okay, let's see here. I wanted to go ahead and go down to, let's say about, you were talking about you're doing lectures and stuff like that. I want to go down to like your agency side. You mentioned like once that you have clients, like client implementation is like very little. And you said like if you can get at least 50% of the implementation, it's awesome. Why do you think like it's hard for clients to implement your recommendations when you apply it? You mention it to them.
Yes. Some clients are better than others at it. I think a lot of it is internal inertia. And sometimes I make recommendations fully understanding that the client is unlikely to implement it because it's too hard or too big of a departure from the current development track. But I'm still duty bound as an SEO consultant to make the recommendation and say, you know, this needs to be improved, but you may actually not be able to implement that in this particular version of the website. Especially with larger websites, there's a lot of legacy issues, a lot of technical debt. You have to pick your battles to a certain extent. You know, sometimes the really big issues just cannot be tackled, and you have to focus the effort on the smaller issues that may be able to get fixed and get at least some traction and some improvement in traffic and rankings. So but I have had clients. There was one client in particular. They were a local Northern Irish company where I'm based, and I sent them the audit at 10 o'clock in the morning and had a meeting with them at 4:30 in the afternoon to discuss it. And I went to that meeting, and the marketing head was there, and the two developers in charge of the website, because they built the whole thing in-house. And the developers were very apologetic because they hadn't been able to quite implement all the recommendations just yet. They needed an extra day or two. And I'm like, sorry, what? You've already implemented most of this? Yeah, we're about 80% done, but the rest is a little bit too challenging. Like, wow, I mean, can I hire you guys? This is fantastic. So that's the other side of the spectrum. And on the one hand, I have had clients where you sort of know after you've done the audit and you've sent it, and there's a follow-up call, and you sort of wait for them to have some follow-up questions later down the line, and those never arrive. And you sort of know that audit just has disappeared into somebody's drawer. It may have been just an exercise for somebody to put a tick on their annual report card of, yeah, we have done an SEO audit. And that saddens me to a certain extent, because for me, the quality of an audit is all about the implementation and do we get actual traffic boosts off of implementing these recommendations. And an audit report in itself, without somebody doing something with it, that's meaningless. That's worthless, really. I mean, I still get paid, but you know, that's not a satisfactory job for me as an SEO consultant. You want clients to succeed off the back of what I can provide them.
Yeah, that's totally true. I mean, okay, with going back to like the news SEO, because this is something that I don't really even hear anyone do, and like you're like the only one I go to for like news SEO. So when I heard a talk, I was like, okay, is this something where we have to get a publisher, become a publisher, and then we get approved? I'm curious, like how does someone get approved to become a publisher? And is this news SEO? Is this where we first start, where a publisher can start by getting approved by Google as a publisher?
Yeah, it used to be a manual process. You used to just manually submit your website for approval and inclusion in Google News, and it was a very clear yes or no, very black and white. You knew exactly where you stood as a website. For me, as an SEO consultant focusing on news publishers especially, it was at that stage pretty comfortable for me to guarantee Google News inclusion, provided the client implemented my recommendations, because I knew exactly what those people at Google were looking for when it came to approving websites in terms of the quality of the reporting, the transparency of where the content came from, all that sort of stuff. Now, almost exactly a year ago, Google switched to an algorithmic approach for inclusion in Google News and all the other news services that Google has. And since then, I've heard of only one website that has actually managed to get into Google News. There's a lot of publishers who are struggling at the moment, who've launched a website or been trying to get into Google News since then, who just aren't getting in. And it's a very inscrutable process, and nobody really knows how it works at the moment. And I'm sure some Googlers even don't really know how it works. It's just the algorithm doing its thing, and it's become a really painful area of news optimization at the moment. I get probably one request a week from a publisher, a new publisher, asking me for help to get into Google News, and I don't know what I can offer them. I can maybe offer them some tips on structuring their website in a certain way, and making sure some technical aspects like structured data and good taxonomies are implemented, new specific XML sitemaps, but that in no way guarantees that it'll ever be included in Google News anymore, because we don't have that manual process anymore. It's just Google's algorithms deciding, oh, that's a news site, that's not a news site, and we're not really sure what those algorithms are looking for. So it's become a very difficult part of news SEO at the moment, and I really hope Google will give us some more documentation on that particular front and some of the things that the algorithm is looking for, because at the moment nobody really has a clue.
Got it. Okay, so it's a black box right now. I'm curious what happens there, because I mean, I know, like, especially when like you mentioned Discover and with the Google Voice and everything like that, and adding the structured data, it's like it's big news, and especially now publishers getting paid supposedly. It's more people want to get into Google News. Okay, like, let's see here. Like, we're coming close to time here, but I want to make sure I asked you something that I always ask my guests here. You've been doing SEO since 1998. I want this to be a kind of a two-part question because you do a lot of speaking. You have a lot of speaking gigs. It's like, how can someone, how'd you get into the speaking circuit? And then tell us like how you would, that's question one. Let's go ahead and how can we get into the speaking circuit and how'd you get into it?
I got into it by just signing up to a local unconference, as it was called, Barcamp Belfast, back in 2009 or 2010, I think it was. And I thought, maybe dip my toes into this. And I didn't expect anybody to attend because it was a very technical focused conference, mainly for web developers. And I thought, I'll do a talk about SEO for web developers and see if anybody shows up. This one of those unconferences where people can write down the names of, I'm going to give a talk on this. And then people put the tick boxes with the names in, I want to attend that, and then they can send people to different rooms. And I thought, we're going to get one of the small side rooms and maybe get 3 or 4 people in there. And they ended up in the main auditorium with 150 developers looking at me, and I was bricking it. I was absolutely scared to death. So I did my talk. I was very nervous. I was shaking like a leaf. And afterwards, people said, yeah, that was pretty decent. That was pretty good, Barry. Okay, so maybe it's not an entirely terrible thing. And I just started signing up for conferences. I went to SASCON in Manchester. They accepted me as a speaker. Again, I was very unpolished, very amateuristic, but it's about getting the experience. And the more talks you do, the better you get. And even now, I've done talks all over the world for massive audiences. I get nervous every single time, and it's about channeling those nerves into your talk and giving a good talk that has good content, but is also interesting and entertaining at the same time. You try to make people laugh sometimes, at least I do. I throw a few jokes in there if I can. None of them always land well, but hey, you live and you learn, right? And I think that's what I would recommend anybody. Just give it a try. Go out there, sign up for a local event. I mean, for me, I've been very, very lucky that I've been invited to speak all over the world. I don't get paid to speak. That most of the conference would pay for my accommodation and my flights. But I consider it a privilege even then to be able to travel the world and give a talk there. And we try to make it a bit of a trip as well. My wife comes along because she's in the business as well. And then we make it a bit of a holiday and then see new places. Like we've been to Istanbul, we've been to Thailand, we've been to Las Vegas. And it's very surreal sometimes where you're standing on stage for 1,500 people listening to you every word. Like, really, am I doing this? Really, people pay good money to hear me blabber on about something? So it's an absolute privilege that I don't ever want to take for granted. But it's something you have to do more of. And like with everything, practice makes perfect. If it's something that you want as an SEO, if you want to become a speaker, just go out there and sign up for those forums. I mean, all conferences are looking for new fresh speakers all the time. I know Brighton SEO here in the UK is always looking for new speakers. So just give it a try and put yourself out there.
Just sign up, guys. Just sign up and do it, and channel your nervous energy into your talk, and you'll get over that. Great stuff. Okay, my last question on SEO is like, I asked this to all my professionals here that come on. It's like, so what is that one tip? If someone wanted to become an SEO professional today, what is that one tip you can give this person, whether or not they understand SEO or if they're just a digital marketer going into SEO? What's that one tip that you would give to for someone to become an SEO professional?
That's a very good question. I think it's the same as with speaking. You got to get your hands dirty. There is no replacement for hands-on experience, because everything that people tell you, people like me, people at conferences, people writing blog posts, that's only from their specific scenarios, their specific contexts. And every website is different. Every website gets treated differently. What works for one site may not work for the other. And it's about just trying stuff out. Don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to try new things. See if you can push the envelope a bit. Try something else entirely. Don't base yourself on conventional wisdom from old grumpy people like myself, but do different things and see what works. And a lot of the time you'll be surprised about what works and what doesn't work, and you may not necessarily understand how or why, but welcome to the club. None of us know. We're all making this stuff up as we go along anyway, so you might as well just give it a try and get your feet wet. If it's a company that you work for that is not really open to experimentation, start a side project or sign up to work for like a local sports club or charity organization and try to get them to rank better. just to have somewhere where you can sort of play around with SEO and see what you can learn from trying new things.
There you have it, guys. Try new things, experiment, and if you can't do it at the company you're at right now, start a side hustle, right? This is something that you need to practice. Practice makes perfect. You need to get your feet wet, and you have to do it in order if you want to become an SEO. So thank you, Barry. I want to make sure everyone can get a hold of you somehow. Like, can you let everyone in the audience know, like, how can someone get a hold of you if they want to talk about news, technical SEO? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
I have an open email policy, barry@polemicdigital.com. Anybody can always ask me anything about SEO via email. I'll always do my best to answer. That's an open invitation to anybody. Or ping me on Twitter, Badams on Twitter, direct messages. I try to respond to those as well when I can. I learned by asking other people questions, and it's something I want to pay forward. So anybody has any question about SEO, please do just shoot them over. Always happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you, Barry, for coming on. I mean, I remember I booked you like when I was only had my first 2 episodes going, and you still accepted my invite. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for taking this becoming a special guest here on the SEO video show. I'm gonna go ahead and close this off and say bye, everyone. Please hold on, and then so I can say bye to you after the show. Okay, let's see here. All right, guys. So this is the last. That's the end of the episode 13. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so next week you can see what's going on. And to close this off, I want to say that I actually was featured on another show called the Hasta La Vista Boss Show, and I want to just go ahead and do a quick plug and show you his quick intro and then sign off. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, I know sometimes it's hard when you get the feeling you just want to quit your job. We've all had that thought. This is what you want. Time to tune in. Hasta la vista, boss. Yeah, for my side hustlers who never stop. Quit your job and making your own profits. Become your own boss. Live life on your terms. Make it happen for real. This is what you deserve. Yeah. Hasta la vista, boss. Subscribe, have fun, and enjoy the ride. Let's go.